10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Greetings, my fellow free and low sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning to LL3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful realms of planet Earth. Today's date is Sunday, January 4th, 2026. This is episode 1928. The alt-right collapsed, and is Venezuela free? Before I proceed, you can follow me on multiple social media sites and podcast channels. Just type in Looky Luck number 3, Looky Luck Roman number 3, 3 eyes, or Looky Luck Roman number 3 podcast. In addition, if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, all that good stuff, whatever you do, please use decorum. Hit me via email to ll3.podcast@proton.me. If you're going to donate, go to PayPal to me or cash.app/lookluck number 3. Oh, yes. I'm just trying to figure out, do a few other things, new ideas and all that. To bear with me, I haven't really published the New Year's Day one with some articles pertaining to American Free Press. But you can probably get the replay. You can check it out for yourselves. I'll post that as well when that time comes. So, yeah, I'm doing okay. Hopefully everyone's living and loving, being neighborly. Interesting year so far, right? Yeah, folks are talking about, of course, Venezuela, Maduro getting taken over, kidnapped, or arrested. So you're going to hear the pros and cons of everything. But we got to look at all angles, which I will be doing that in the next segment. But so, without further ado, this one caught my eye, and it came out a couple of days ago from the UNS Review, which is an alternative media selection. Remember the glamour boy himself, Richard Spencer? Well, Jonas E. Alexis wrote this. Why Richard Spencer's alt-right collapsed under its own contradictions. Good question, right? And that's why I get a good chuckle with some of these geniuses out here. But we'll just do this. As it reads, Spencer was an avid reader of Nietzsche, particularly during the height of the alt-right movement. Immanuel Kant famously remarked this. It was David Hume who awakened him from his domestic slumber. In a comparable sense, Spencer could be said to have attributed a similar intellectual awakening to Nietzsche. As Spencer recalled himself, one could say that I was red-pilled by Nietzsche, or Nietzsche, right? Spencer described his encounter with Nietzsche on the genealogy of morals as intellectually transformative, claiming that work shattered his prior moral universe and fundamentally altered his ethical outlook. A common view among sociologists of religion is that religion functions to sustain moral order. Nietzsche recognized this function of religion, and insofar as he opposed the prevailing moral order, developing a sustained critique of religion. Nietzsche concentrated his critique on Christianity in particular, and in a deliberately provocative gesture, famously styled himself as the Antichrist. Nietzsche advocated that since God is dead, then something else has to take his place. Nietzsche argued that with the death of God, some alternative principle would necessarily assume the role formerly occupied by the divine. For Nietzsche, this principle was the will to power, a concept he developed in dialogue with and partly in response to Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy. What can be said of Nietzsche is that he was acutely aware of the metaphysical implications of his worldview. He recognized that by rendering morality irrelevant, questioning of meaning and value would likewise be undermined and risk becoming obsolete. Nietzsche, as a proponent of nihilism, sought to dismantle what he regarded as the moral foundations of Western civilization and to replace them with what he called transvaluation transvaluation of all values. At the same time, he recognized that Darwin and other modern thinkers were implicitly pursuing a similar project while attempting to preserve some residue notion of morality. For Nietzsche, such a position was incoherent. One cannot serve the metaphysical foundations of morality and simultaneously maintain that morality continues to exist. In announcing Nietzsche's critique of Darwin, will Durant summarize the issue as follows. If life is a struggle of existence in which the fittest survive, then strength is the ultimate virtue and the weakness the only fault. Good is that which survives, which wins. Bad is that which gives way and fails. Only the mid-Victorian cowardice of the English Darwinians and the rigorous respectability of French positivists and German socialists could conceal the inevitableness of this conclusion. Will Durant observed that Darwin and his followers were bold in rejecting the metaphysical foundations of morality. However, he argued that he lacked the courage to pursue the implications of this rejection to their logical conclusion. As Durant put it, they did not dare to be logical, to reject the moral ideas, the worship of meekness and gentleness and altruism, which has grown out that theology. They ceased to be Anglicans or Catholics or Lutherans, but they did not dare cease to be Christians, so argued Friedrich Nietzsche. Similar tensions can be observed within the alt-right movement, which exhibited comparable inconsistencies in its moral and philosophical commitments. Durant continued to say, Darwin unconsciously completed the work of the encyclopedists. They had removed the theological basis of modern morals, but they had left that morality itself untouched and inviolated. Hanging miraculously in the air, a little breath of biology was all that was needed to clear away his remnant of imposture. Spencer further demonstrated his misunderstanding of Darwinian theory when he asserted that natural selection does not even favor of what might call the strongest, most beautiful, most intelligent. The evidence he offered in support of this claim was a 2005 science fiction comedy film, Idiocracy. It is the level of intellectual argument being advanced to a largely uncritical audience. Of course, when I first heard him speak, I just bust out laughing. Who's this glamour boy, for goodness sakes? Come on. But I'll continue on. According Spencer, Darwinism offers a compelling and rational justification for people like himself to act on behalf of their ancestors and progeny and feel a sense of destiny with their extended kin group. However, as a staunch Darwinist, Daniel C. Dennett himself observes in Darwin's dangerous idea, evolution and the meaning of life. Darwin explains a world of final causes and theological law with a principle that is, to be sure, mechanistic, but more fundamentally, utterly independent of meaning or purpose. It assumes a world that is absurd in the existentialist sense of the term, not ludicrous, but pointless, and this assumption is a necessary condition of any non-question begging account of purpose. Then it continued, I do suggest that Darwinian thinking helps us see why traditional hope of solving these problems, finding moral algorithm, is forlorn. We must cast off the myths that make these old-fashioned solutions seem inevitable. We need to grow up, in other words. This raises the question of whether Spencer can seriously maintain that Darwinism offers a compelling and rational justification for purpose and meaning. What emerges instead is a fundamental confusion. Spencer appears to affirm sources of meaning that Darwinism is a naturalistic framework is ill-equipped to sustain. This tension reflects a broader intellectual incoherence that has characterized that alt-right's philosophical foundations and has contributed to the movement's theoretical exhaustion. Either Spencer has failed to reflect seriously on the fundamental implications of Darwinism a lapse that would be striking for a public figure, or he has been unwilling or unable to follow his conclusions to their bitter end. In other words, he was unwilling to accept the full logical implications of Darwinian theory and consequently resorted at times to rhetorical backtracking in order to sustain an internally incoherent system. A third possibility that is he is largely indifferent to this tension. He appears comfortable sustaining internal contradictions and unwilling to acknowledge to his followers that such contradiction constitutes a foundational feature of the alt-right's ideological framework. Over the past several years, it has become apparent that many defenders of Darwinism appears relatively unconcerned with resolving its internal contradictions or with following its implications wherever they may lead. In this respect, Spencer is not exceptional. He and others operate within a Darwinian framework that, taken on its own terms, undermines claims to ultimate purpose and meaning. Yet Spencer simultaneously seeks to affirm such purpose and meaning for his followers. This position entails a clear and unresolved contradiction. In short, the alt-right proves incapable of sustaining itself and rapidly collapsed in large measure because its foundational principles were not grounded in what Kant describes as practical reason. From the outset, the movement rested on philosophically unstable premises, and any system built on such a foundation lacks the coherence necessary for long-term viability. Moreover, insofar as practical reason and moral constraint were effectively marginalized within the movement, patterns of ethical transgression were neither surprising nor anomalous. The personal conduct of several prominent figures, including Matthew Heimbach, the former leader of the Traditionalist Worker Party, illustrated this moral incoherence in particularly public and damaging ways. Heimbach was literally caught with his pants down. On March 14th, police in Indiana hometown arrested Heimbach after he allegedly assaulted TWP spokesperson Matthew Parrott during a fight over their wives, both of whom Heimbach was allegedly sleeping with. Heimbach's wife is Parrott's stepdaughter. Interesting. Allegedly, so I'll be very fair, right? Parrott discovered that Heimbach was sleeping with his wife, Jessica, in order to verify his suspicion. Arranged to set up Heimbach and Jessica in a trailer on his property to catch them having sex. Parrott stood out on the box outside the trailer and watched Heimbach and Jessica have sex inside. According to a police report, when the box broke under Parrott's weight, he entered the trailer to confront him. Heimbach allegedly choked him and chased him into the house, where Parrott threw a chair at him. Heimbach hit back, choking him into unconsciousness, according to the police report. Oh, talking about entrapment, man, right? From Mr. Heimbach. And Mr. Parrott, you should always be careful. You should always have something ready to go. During the fight, it was reported that Heimbach choked Parrott several times, causing him to lose consciousness. When the police arrived at the trailer, they found both Heimbach and Jessica outside. Jessica claimed to be merely a neighbor and subsequently left the premises. Then Heimbach went inside and sent his own wife out instead, telling her to send the police away and tell them everything was fine. The police report reads, Heimbach began to raise his voice at her, and I heard scuffling and Heimbach's wife yelling. An officer wrote. We are told the incident occurred in front of Heimbach's two children, a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. When Heimbach's wife was unwilling to cooperate in dismissing the police, Heimbach became visibly agitated. According to his wife, he kicked the wall and grabbed my cheeks, making them bleed, threw me on my face onto the bed. Heimbach was arrested at the scene. Other individuals associated with the Unite the Right rally were likewise arrested in connection with similar incidents. After Heimbach debacle, Parrott lamented, I'm no longer involved in the movement, and I have no stake in all the stupid shit going on in it. He also said people have lost faith in the party on every level. I guarantee that all membership data was destroyed because a lot concerned with people's information being caught in this white trash circus. Wow. Oh my goodness. So some of these people I can say, are allegedly street stupid, according to this verse of the paragraphs of the article. But I'll continue on. The real Richard Spencer. There was more to Richard Spencer than his public persona suggests. Multiple accounts indicate a pattern of sustained domestic abuse toward his wife. According to sworn testimony, Spencer repeatedly subjected her to verbal degradation, including exhortations to commit suicide and the use to explicit misogynistic slurs such as, "Why don't you kill yourself?" More seriously, his wife, Nina Koprianova, I think that's Russian. I heard she was a Russian Jew, too, so I'll continue on. Alleged that he physically assaulted her on several occasions, including an incident in which he pushed her into a stove while she was pregnant. She further reported that Spencer would routinely wake her by shouting at her again, urging her to kill herself. Koprianova documented these episodes by recording hours of Spencer's verbal abuse, portions of which she later transcribed and submitted as part of a legal affidavit. Some of the text messages that Koprianova reported exchanging with Spencer are deeply disturbing in content to the extent that they suggest a profoundly troubling attitude toward women. Spencer himself has credited Nietzsche with having awakened him from what he described as his domestic slumber, and it is therefore not unreasonable to examine the philosophical influences shaping his views. Nietzsche's writings, particularly Thus Spoke Zarathustra, contain deliberately provocative and controversial statements about women. Most famously, "Are you visiting women? Don't forget your whip." And I'm going to be very frank about that quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, okay? I'm not going to do that to all. I'm not going to do it to all women in general. So I'm not going to do it on a collective basis. But they're like the handful of men out there, great amount of men out there, the great amount of women. They believe they're smarter than everybody else. So one area, metaphorically, don't forget your whip. In other words, have your shield ready. Have your armor ready to go. So that's how I look at it. But it is funny. Hey, and don't get me wrong. Like I said, there's some beautiful people out there from all walks of life, but always expect the imbeciles, the ingrates, and the yahoos. And I digress. I'll continue on. At one point, Spencer allegedly told Koprianova that suicide seems to be your best option, adding that you're deluded if you think I don't hate you. Fuck yourself. Talk about projection, right? From a glamour boy himself. These statements stated in sharp contrast to the cultivated public persona Spencer has often presented, one characterized by charm and intellectual composure. The disparity between his self-presentation and his private communication suggests a deeply troubling pattern of behavior. Moreover, Spencer reportedly expressed the view that the only language women understand is violence. Koprianova told one reporter that Spencer once pushed her into a stove when she was pregnant, dragging her down the stairs by her arms. Koprianova plays me recording of him screaming at her while the children sob in the background, telling her he will fucking break her nose. And I'm excuse the vulgarity, okay, in this article. I'm just letting you know. So it's not me. It's just what I'm reading here. All right. Telling her to go kill herself, to jump off a bridge, and there is more. Will your parents even go to your funeral? He taunts in one recording. I can hear the high-pitched sound of cartoons playing in the background. The children are right there. In one recording, he wakes her up at 1 a.m. to repeatedly ask her what her problem is. Let me sleep, she begs. You're waking up the baby. I would recommend that you murder yourself because you have nothing to offer the world, he said. You are profoundly disgusting. The central questions that follows are these. Is Koprianova not herself of European descent? Within the framework of Spencer's proposed white ethno-state, how would he classify or situate his own wife, whom he allegedly described as a genetically defective and as a parasite? Will she not, by implication, be among those subjected to the consequence of Spencer's proposed peaceful ethnic cleansing? Given Spencer's invocation of genetic considerations at this point. One by reasonably infer how readily such reasoning could be extended in ethnically troubling directions, even toward those closest to him. Notwithstanding his wife's academic credentials, including a PhD in history from the University of Toronto. This episode once again illustrates how eugenic reasoning functions less as a scientific or rational framework than as a political slogan, selectively deployed to serve ideological ends, far from constituting science or Kantian practical reason. Eugenics operates here as a form of ideological reductionism. Moreover, Spencer is generally committed to the construction of an ethno-state. It is unclear why this commitment fails to manifest in his own domestic conduct. His wife has alleged that he repeatedly neglected basic household responsibilities, including the payment of water, internet, electricity, and cell phone bills, and failed to maintain health care payments, resulting in lapse in family medical coverage on 3 separate occasions. All right. One may also reasonably ask why Spencer does not exhibit even minimal regard for his children by treating their mother with dignity in their presence. Taken together, these patterns point out to a persistent inability to subordinate personal impulse for practical reason. Like several of his intellectual forebears, such as Rousseau, Darwin, Herbert Spencer, William Goodwin, Bertrand Russell, Michael Foucault, Peter Singer, and others, Richard Spencer's theory appears to have been applicable primarily to others rather than to himself or his own family. He was eager to attract media attention to advance sweeping claims and to repeat a series of axiomatic assertions. When it came to practical and personal application, Spencer's commitments proved conspicuously absent. A similar pattern can be observed among several influential modern thinkers. Rousseau famously articulated an idealized theory of child rearing while placing all 5 of his own children in founding homes. An inquiry concerning political justice, William Goodwin argued that marriage ought to be abolished. However, when Percy Bysshe Shelley, who has been influenced by Goodwin's work, attempted to apply this principle in practice by eloping with Goodwin's daughter, rejecting marriage and advocating sexual free love, Godwin, reacted with indignation. Darwin, while advancing requirements that emphasize the elimination of weakness in nature and society, took considerable measures to protect and care for several of his own children who suffered from frailty or illness. Foucault devoted much of his work to the analysis of power relations, yet some of his intellectual and personal practices relied heavily on institutional and social power structures from which he benefited. In fact, according to biographer James Miller, Foucault entered what Miller characterized as Faustian pact, whereby access to institutional power was intertwined with opportunities for transgressive sexual freedom, including encounters in bathhouses in locations such as California. Likewise, Peter Singer has defended euthanasia in principle, yet refrained from applying such reasoning to his own mother, despite reports that she expressed herself willingness for euthanasia. Oh, I'm sorry. I know it's pretty long, my friends, but you gotta admit, this is chilling, but comical at the same time. Very dark. But you see, the game is called hypocrisy. They're going to tell you how we should think, and they can't even handle their own affairs. It's just like typical politicians, regardless of paradigm, okay? They just sound like them crappy. I'll continue on. Okay, let me just see here. I'm just going to, Richard Spencer's disconnection to the real world is evident in the following statement. As brother nations, Europeans have competed with one another and even hated and killed one another. We can no longer afford the luxury of interracial squabbling. Brothers' war gain us nothing and directly lead to our collective downfall. Europeans must come together as a family. If Spencer's theory were in fact viable, it would represent a historical anomaly, as there is no period where such a theory can be shown to have functioned successfully in practice, even when one looks as far back as the reign of Henry VIII. How would anyone frame the following statements in moral terms? I'm so effing mad at these people. They don't do this to effing me. We're going to effing ritualistically humiliate them. I win, they effing lose, little effing kikes. They get ruled by people like me. Little effing auto-runes. My ancestors effing enslaved those effing pieces of effing crap. I'm sorry, they look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. I rule the effing world. Those pieces of crap get ruled by people like me. We're going to destroy this effing town. Who then uttered these remarks? Do they reflect sociopathic tendencies, narcissistic traits, or profound inability to regulate passion and impulse? The statements in question, recorded by an anonymous source described as reliable and subsequently decimated on YouTube and other platforms by Milo Yiannopoulos, were made by Richard Spencer in the immediate aftermath of the Charlottesville event. Richard Spencer, the white Zionist. If one is inclined to view Richard Spencer and the Zionist state of Israel as ideologically distinct, this assumption warrants reconsideration. In 2018, the Israeli Knesset passed the nation-state law, which formally defined Israel as a nation-state of the Jewish people. Spencer publicly responded by asserting that this legislation closely resembled the political objectives he himself advocated. In a subsequent tweet, he characterized the law as broadly analogous to his own ethno-nationalist vision. Spencer stated, I have a great admiration for Israel's nation-state law. Jews are, once again, at the vanguard, rethinking politics and sovereignty for the future, showing the path forward for Europeans. By invoking Israel's nation-state law, does Spencer demonstrate any substantive understanding of the historical and political process that produced this legislation? One is left to question whether he has engaged seriously with the relevant scholarly literature addressing Israel's formation and its treatment of Palestinians. Foundational works such as The British of Palestinian Refugee Problem Revisited, The Forgotten Palestinians, A History of Palestinians in Israel and Jewish Terrorism in Israel, complicated any superficial comparison by situating the law within a longer history of displacement, interstratification, and state violence context that Spencer appears either unaware or unwilling to confront. Perhaps it is pertinent at this juncture to invoke once again the work of Benny Morris, one of Israel's most prominent Zionist historians. Morris has stated unequivocally, a Jewish state will not have come into being without uprooting of several 100,000 Palestinians. Therefore, it was necessary to uproot them. There was no choice but to expel the population. It was necessary to cleanse the hinterland and cleanse the border areas and cleanse the main roads. It was necessary to cleanse the villages from which our convoys and our settlements were fired on. If Spencer were generally unaware of this historical and scholarly context, such as ignorance might invite a degree of charitable interpretation. However, if this is indeed the case, it will call into question his decision to publicly express great admiration for Israel's nation-state law, since doing so without adequate understanding undermines the credibility of his claims and exposes the superficiality of his analysis. If, however, Spencer was aware of this historical and political context and nevertheless continued to praise Israel, then a more consequential conclusion follows. The so-called alternative right may be understood as another movement seeking to advance an essentially Zionist conception of the world. Spencer's remarks were sufficiently striking that they elicit surprise, even if you're explicitly a pro-Zionist media outlets. Newsweek, for example, observed that 1.8 million Arabs in Israel, around 20% of the country's population, and noted that Spencer appeared to dismiss their views in such the same matter as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It to avoid the conclusion that the establishment of Israel was accompanied by widespread violence and displacement of innocent Palestinian populations, Spencer chose to disregard this historical record and instead continue to advance his ideological commitments. This selective engagement with history further underscores why the alt-right has become intellectually and morally untenable. By the time Spencer was recorded making inflammatory remarks in the aftermath of the Charlottesville event, remarks that precipitated his subsequent political marginalization and near total exclusion from mainstream media discourse. Spencer's alternative right was philosophically and intellectually untenable, not because it failed to attract individuals attentive to contemporary political developments, but because its underlying metaphysical commitments were structured around irreconcilable contradictions. Spencer's willingness to entertain the notion of a white Zionist, in particular, exposes a fundamental incoherence within the movement's ideological framework. It can plausibly be argued that Spencer, like-minded figures, once again absorb and reproduce a system and thought that mirrors rather than challenges the ethno-nationalist logic long institutionalized by the Israeli state. There's a lot of sources in here too you can read for yourselves, but I'm sorry. I find this very entertaining indeed, folks. And when you start looking at this about Richard Spencer, for the first time I heard this man speak around 2016, it was like a comedy show for me. I'm like, hey, where the hell's where's Al Sharpton and where's Abraham Foxman? Oh, we look alike and smell the same. Crappy, right? So I'm just sorry. That's why I don't wig out on these people. That's why when I see individuals like people claim to be anyone and they clock Richard Spencer, I'm like, what do you do that for? You leaving a man with dignity, mock him, ridicule him. Now he claims to be a wife beater. Give him a dress. Give him some high heels. Send him some lipstick. See, this guy is nothing more than a dweeb. And I have my differences with issues too, like with what's his name? Dr. William Pierce for the National Alliance. There's some controversy with him too. But you know what? I respect his merits a lot more than this goofball. All right. And I'm not a lovey-dovey with the National Alliance. So don't even think about that. But one thing we know for sure, when you got someone speaking and trying to tell you how to live and think and give you all this motivation, you make sure they got their own house cleaned up and organized. There's like every other else, even these beakers out there with the Mondami, Bernie Sanders, AOC, George Mitchell. We can go on. It's like the same old thing. So all the world's a stage, my friends. If you're not paying attention, you get succumbed. We've all been swindled one way or the other, but friends don't let friends be entrapped. Well, I got that was a pretty long one. Oh, it's got 33 minutes. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna be gotta feed my dog for the moment. So hang out. I'll be right back. I'll play the intro a little bit, a few more times. So bear with me. All right, I'm back. Just got to be a little brief here, folks. So, enough of the whole thing was going on with Glamboy, Richard Spencer, and the alt-right. I trim at all these other subversified institutions, Black Lives Matter, they're nothing more than synthetic. They're frauds. They're shysters. Want to use people. Don't play their game. Things are happening in the woodworks. I want to do a little article here in reference to Venezuela and a couple things here. And this one here came from the Epoch Times. Maduro's capture sends a message to China. Other authoritarian states analysis. And this came out today. It's by Michael Zanghang. On January 3rd, under President Trump's order, U.S. Operation Forces launched a raid of the Venezuela capital of Caracas and captured wanted Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife. They were taken to New York to face narco-terrorism charges. It was an operation that analyst says carries implications far beyond Venezuela, particularly for China and other authoritarian states aligned against Washington. Analysts said the operation represents the clearest expression of yet Trump's revived Monroe Doctrine, or the Dunroe Doctrine, as Trumps call it, that treats the U.S. national security and law enforcement as imperishable. The capture and contradiction of Maduro signals that the U.S. national security, particularly in the geopolitical domain, has become an absolute priority, he said. For Washington's perspective, Maduro lost legitimacy long ago through election manipulation and state-linked drug trafficking that directly threaten U.S. security. There's a lot of questions on that too, folks, so I'm just going to continue on. Tang said Washington's move reflects a deliberate decision by the Trump administration to treat certain foreign leaders not as protected sovereigns, but as criminal actors. For leaders who have lost legitimacy and committed major crimes, the United States now sees itself as having both the right and the responsibility to act as an international law enforcer, he said. Echoes of 1989 Panama. Shang Mingxi, research, a fellow Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and National Security Research, noted that while the operation is extraordinary, it is not without precedent. In 1989, the United States captured Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega and brought him to the United States on drug trafficking charges. Shen said the raid in Venezuela was far more consequential given the country's larger size and deep entanglements with China and Russia. On the surface, Maduro's main office was trafficking drugs into the United States, but in reality, Washington was deeply concerned about Venezuela's oil exports to the Chinese Communist Party, its broader to cooperation with China, and its close ties with Russia, he said. This is why the military intervention carries major implications, not only for South America, but also for China and Russia. Shen said the mission was targeted enforcement action against specific individuals rather than a war action. Following Maduro's removal, Shen said Venezuela has entered a temporary power vacuum. He said that interim arrangements are likely potentially followed by transitional government and new elections. Strategic message. Zhu Yun, another research fellow at the National Institute for National Defense and Security Research, said the operation must be understood within a broader regional strategy. This direct action by Trump comes off a major source of narcotics flowing into the United States, he said, but its deeper meaning is geopolitical. It is aimed at expelling Chinese and Russian influence from South America. Xu pointed to Maduro's arrival in the United States, where he was transferred into the custody of Drug Enforcement Administration. That detail demonstrates that this was a law enforcement action grounded in criminal accountability, he said. So I'm going to continue on here. Avoiding a long war. Mark Sayo, a U.S.-based military tech analyst, former materials engineer, host of Chinese language military news YouTube channel Mark Space, said the operation reflects a calculated effort to avoid an expensive and prolonged ground war that may lead to massive U.S. casualties. By capturing Maduro and his wife, the Maduro regime is being broken into pieces, and the United States avoided a long and costly ground war, he said. This strategy removes the main obstacle in the regime. Kao said the approach also delivered a sharp psychological blow to Beijing and Moscow, both which have backed Maduro diplomatically and economically. Maduro met with a delegation representing the CCP just hours before he was captured by U.S. forces overnight. China has just sent envoys signaling support, Cahill said, but before any material assistance could arrive, the regime collapsed. Implications beyond Venezuela. Analysts agree that Maduro's capture implications far beyond Venezuela. For China, the impact is significant, Shen said. Venezuela is an important energy supplier, yet when the United States carry out the capture, China and Russia have virtually no ability to respond beyond verbal condemnation. Cahill added that the operation sends a broader warning to authoritarian leaders. This kind of capture of the leader-first strategy sends a powerful deterrent message to the CCP and other authoritarian regimes, he said. In such regimes, the supreme leader, often the party chief, is the central pillar holding the political system together. Once that figure is removed, the entire structure becomes unstable. The opposition forces emerge as elite detect, and the regime can unravel very quickly. Tang said the Venezuela operation represents a rupture with long-standing assumptions about sovereignty. As the head of the sovereign state, his authority has traditionally been treated as inviolable, meaning other countries are barred from intervening in his what framed as a nation's internal affairs, he said. President Trump's decision to capture Maduro alive, however, has effectively redefined that rule and has reshaped an entirely new international order. According to Tang, the United States has signaled a new principle. Leaders who engage in large-scale criminal activity and threaten U.S. national security may be forcibly removed and prosecuted regardless of their formal status as a head of state. This represents an assertion of U.S. power through enforcement, he said. So, very interesting there on this article, but there's still a lot of questions on what has come to this. And I know many people do talk about the drugs, the fentanyl. There's claims that they're actually one of the hubs. And even when during the Biden administration, they opened up the borders and let a lot of people in. And there was even reports, too, that Maduro cleaned out his prisons and brought them up there. So you could say it's more of a history lesson when it comes to like the barbaric pirates. You know, they violate others. I remember it was very similar when they were, it happened on the Jefferson, by the way. The United States' first war on terror happened on Thomas Jefferson's presidency. And it was during that time when the pirates in Tripoli, in that area of northern Africa, were kidnapping shipmates and taking their goods and extorting those nations through ransom. So when they did that to the Americans, the economy actually affected them heavily. So Jefferson tried to find a way of trying to get things rationalized, and they told him where to go. So instead, he just had the ships that's doing trade ships, and had the Navy behind them along the way, just following them. And William Eaton was hiring mercenaries, part of the Marines, and had Turks and going across from Egypt to the deserts of Libya. A very interesting book called Tripoli, the United States' first war on terror. And you can say it's very similar to that. And I'm just wondering how many people from the Trindagua will be testifying against him, and even including the one president he pardoned for drugs, and the Honduran president. So you got to look at things a lot bigger than what it is. And many people are saying, too, this could be part of the whole Club of Rome agenda, which I wouldn't be surprised, not just President Trump himself, but the people behind the scenes. So we always got to look at these areas more thoroughly. And there's a report here. One person wrote yesterday, named Gary Nolan, says here, rules for thee, force for me, America's doctrine of leader capture. Here's what Jerry Nolan has to say. Or Gary, or Jerry, one of those two. It starts with a G, by the way. Here we are watching the rules for thee, but not me. Base order performs its favorite magic trick, or turning performative flexing of might into virtue by simply narrating it as law. The United States has kidnapped Venezuela's sitting president, Nicolas Maduro, along his wife, via an operation carried out by Delta forces, and removed them from the country. The choreography matters. The message matters more. We can reach into your capital and take your head of state and call it justice. But hey, we'll own that. We'll own that. Excuse me. But hey, we'll own that it's about oil and minerals and the next breath. So at least we are honest bandits. And the world is meant to accept it because the banner says narco terror and the megaphone says freedom. But strip branding off, and you're left with something brutally simple: a doctrine of unilateral capture, the right claimed by one state to arrest another state leader by force, without a UN mandate and without an authorization of war recognized by the international mechanism. This sets an extremely dangerous precedent and raises serious questions about the questions under the UN Charter. Okay, so I'm not a big United Nations fan, folks. They're pretty damn ludicrous as far as I'm concerned. If you actually look at the history of it, they're pretty bad too. But we'll continue on. And that's the point, isn't it? Because rules for thee, but not for me isn't a slogan anymore. It's long-established imperial hypocrisy. For weeks, Washington has been tightening the maritime noose, seizing tankers, escalating interdictions, flowing the language of blockade, armada, while insisting it's something softer, something cleaner, something that doesn't smell like an act of war. Yet international law is not fooled by euphemism. A blockade is a blockade, and a blockade is specifically listed as a paramedic use of force in the legal logic of warfare. So when Washington behaves like a global Coast Guard with a private statute book, seizing ships, choking ports, quarantining, right? Yep. A sovereign country's commerce, the legal argument for much of the non-West is straightforward. This isn't about law enforcement. It's coercion by force and a legal act of aggression. And now what Maduro reportedly sees, the quarantine graduates into a purest expression of gangsterism logic. If we can't reshape your politics through ballots, we can't squeeze you. Though through sanctions alone, we'll reach in and remove the human hinge of the state. That is a doctrine of permissible abduction, and every American adversary with meat will use the precedent. The Taiwan mirror. Now zoom out. Because the Venezuelan episode is not isolated, it's part of the same imperial grammar used everywhere else. When China conducts drills around Taiwan, it's like Justice Mission 2025 drill. Washington framed it as aggression, but when Washington's own legal posture is far more hypocritical and laughable than its outrage suggests. The U.S. position spelled out by its acceptance of the one China policy is that it recognizes the PRC as the sole legal government of China and acknowledges, but does not endorse, the Chinese position that Taiwan is part of China. Even when messaging shifts on its margin, Washington continues to insist it remains committed to its one China policy. Essentially, Washington wants an ambiguity of a lawyer and outrage of a revolutionary. At the same time, it wants to acknowledge a claim when it's convenient, then it behaves as if it never acknowledged when it wants leverage. And here's the consequence. If you accept the legal posture, U.S. legal posture, as written, then Chinese drills in the waters and skies surrounding territory it claims are not foreign adventurism. They are operations in its own strategic perimeter, which the U.S. acknowledges in accepting the one China policy. Meanwhile, the same Washington that lectures Beijing about stability and its tightening maritime blockade on Venezuela now boasts of physically removing its leader, which is more destabilizing drills around China's perimeter on the normalization of leader snatch operations. The U.S. just handed China the president on a silver platter, though the difference is China will have a legal case. The U.S. told China to stay out of his own backyard with Venezuela. That's a big backyard. China will not, for a second, entertain lectures from a hypocritical U.S. administration. And then, right on cue, the empire's sacred props arrive. The anointed democracy champion, the foreign applause, the ready-made transitional script. Maria Corina Machado, foreign agent, have been elevated on the world stage and handed not awarded the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize, the Imperial Precipitation Trophy. Her allies are now openly celebrating the capture of Maduro as an hour of freedom. From the global majority lens, this is a familiar script of international prizes and recognition as priming the audience for the regime change, a moral liquor applied to an illegal kidnapping operation. The hollow arrives after the target list is pre-written. Now you can dislike Maduro, you can detest Caracas' governance. None of that settled the core point. External capture by force alongside externally created leadership is not self-determination. It is the old imperial script with modern branding. Talking about the Monroe, talking about a few things here, but I'll continue on. I can't say Monroe Doctrine, but some people try to use that. So I'll just keep on here. When you continue to normalize unilateral force as justice, then you have replaced international law with the hierarchy of punity, but at least three can play that game. That's why Russia and China keep dragging the argument back to the first principles: sovereignty, non-intervention, and the prohibition on the use of force except under tightly constrained conditions. They are invoking the logic of the post-1945 order is supposed to rest on. For the United States, for the U.S., and its European gang of cowering vassals, you cannot claim the mantle of international law while behaving it as it is a menu. You cannot preach against spheres of influence while enforcing one with warships. If you want the Monroe Doctrine, get ready. If you want your Monroe Doctrine, get ready for Russia and China's version, and don't about the natural consequences of your own actions. You cannot lecture and sanction others for provocations while executing the most provocative acts of all, turning sovereign heads of state into exportable prisoners. If the leader capture becomes normalized, the world becomes an arena of legitimized kidnapping. At once that door opens, it doesn't say Western only for long. Not when the global balance of power has shifted, not when combined Eurasia and global South capacity dwarfs that of the West, let alone decline EU. So yes, might makes right until it doesn't, because once leader captures, maritime strangulation, and selective legality are normalized, the world does not slide gently into chaos. It hardens into and accepts it. Law becomes costume, sovereignty becomes conditional, the power stops pretending it needs permission. The lecture circuit ends not with applause or rebuttal, but with silence. That the kind that follows when every capital understands the same thing at once, that the hunt has been legitimized, and in the world where abduction is policy and force rights precedent, the next knock will not be answered with arguments, but with fire. Has a good solid point there. And here's the thing too, folks. All sides have been doing, doesn't matter if Democrat, Republican. Have you remembered when around 2011 when Barack Obama decided to have people get involved in attacking Libya and terminate Gaddafi, right? Do you remember that? Absolutely. So, hey, is that being a dictator? If you say no, then you're delusional. I didn't see people out there protesting. I remember when they did that with Bush, about Bush and Cheney, right? About the wars in Iraq. But when it came to Libya, crickets. So if you're gonna do that, folks, you do it across the board. Okay? That's how I look at it. You don't just make it into a trend. Oh, along my team's in there, that's okay. Exceptionalism is a sham. So this is why with this ordeal too, I always question everything, observe responsibly, try to look at all sides the best I can. In my personal viewpoint, when it comes to that, it should have been more, in my opinion, the Interpol should have gotten more involved in this with the warrant for his arrest. But that's just my input on it. So, however, I want to read here what's been going on, what's been happening with, came out yesterday, by the way, late yesterday. U.S. attack on Venezuela killed at least 40, including military personnel and civilians. One U.S. airstrike hit an apartment building and killed at least one civilian, an 80-year-old woman. You have to expect that. This by David DeCamp. The U.S. attack on Venezuela on early Saturday morning that resulted in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife killed at least 40 people, including military personnel and civilians. The New York Times has reported, citing an unnamed senior Venezuelan official. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has said that the U.S. attack killed civilians and military personnel, but didn't give a number. The Venezuelan official, speaking to the Times, that didn't provide a breakdown on the number of civilians and military personnel killed. According to the Times report, at least one U.S. strike hit a civilian target, a 3-story apartment building in Catia Lamar, a coastal area west of the Caracas Airport, knocking out an exterior wall and killing an 80-year-old woman named Rosa Gonzalez. Another woman was severely injured by the strike, which destroyed several apartments, and she's in critical condition. President Trump suggested in an interview on Saturday morning that there were some injuries among U.S. troops during the attack. So far, there has been no official word from the U.S. military on casualties. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said at a press conference that U.S. helicopters was hit during the operation but was able to fly across Caracas. Kane said the U.S. assault involved more than 150 aircraft and strike on Venezuelan military facilities and air defenses to ensure safe passage of the helicopters into the target area where they captured Maduro. He said that U.S. intelligence assets have been watching the movement of Maduro and that the operation was planned for months amid a major U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean and threats of war. Trump said at a press conference that the U.S. was able to cut off most of the powers of the Venezuelan capital city. The light of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. He said Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, have been indicted by the U.S. government over allegations of drug trafficking and claim that they violated U.S. gun law. They have been flown to New York to face charges. If this actions were constitutionally sound, the Attorney General wouldn't be tweeting that they've arrested the president of a sovereign country and his wife of possessing guns in violation of 1934 U.S. firearm law. Representative Tom Massey said on X, while the drugs were used as a pretext for the attack, Trump has the U.S. now plans to run Venezuela until a government acceptable to the U.S. is stalled and to ensure that government companies access to Venezuela's oil. Trump made clear that he's considering sending troops into Venezuela as part of an occupation force, claiming that he is not afraid of boots on the ground. Trump has also claimed that the U.S. was speaking with Rodriguez and that the Venezuelan vice president was willing to work with us, though she strongly condemned the U.S. invasion and has called Maduro to be released. Rodriguez also said Venezuela will never again be a colony of any empire. Venezuela Supreme Court has ordered Rodriguez to assume the duties as acting president of Venezuela, saying she will assume and exercise as acting president all the powers and duties and faculties inherent to the office of the president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in order to guarantee administrative continuity and the comprehensive defense of the nation. While Maduro was removed, his government remains intact, and Trump has threatened that he's willing to launch a second wave of attacks if necessary. Questions, right? That's how you got to look at that. You always got to look at things in the bigger picture that it is. And don't get me wrong, I'm not lovey-dovey with Maduro and government as a whole. I see, so you know why? Because when it comes to totalitarianism, who benefits, who can screw the most? The people, the rank and file. It doesn't matter where they're at. The citizens, civilians, etc. don't matter. They're the ones who get shafted the most. And what really dawns on me, I see people in the Doral area of Miami-Dade County all celebrating, Venezuela, we're free. Let me tell you something. You better learn a damn lesson what has happened. You don't go around asking for underdog. The sweet poly purebred complex is irrelevant. It only works in cartoons. Watch that cartoon Underdog, and then you understand where I'm coming from. Some of the areas that really hurt Venezuela too was the central banking system. Some people say, Rothschild Bank. Yeah, central banking system since 1939. Fiat currency. That's why everything went up and hell in a handbasket. And another thing we got to look at too, their firearm laws were very bad. You could only use a certain grade and model, but thereafter you're considered a criminal. Then until the Chavez regime, they all did an article here. It's 324. It's from the Venezuelan Analysts. Only the state shall be permitted to possess and use the weapons of war. Any such weapons which now exist or are manufactured in or import into the country shall become the property of the Republic without compensation or proceeding. The National Armed Forces shall be the institution of competence to regulate and control in accordance with the pertinent legislation, the manufacture, importing, exporting, storage, transit, registration, control, inspection, marketing, possession, and use of other weapons, munitions, and explosions. So what is it telling you? Venezuela is a police state. One example. Because if the people can't have the arms to protect their families of tyranny, foreign or domestic, and the state has it, that's right. Totalitarianism at its finest. Is that governmental dictatorship? So all those people out there, all those commies out there are protesting. I see them with their Chavez signs and all that in these United States. You support a police state? Stop contradicting yourselves. Bunch of hypocrites, as far as I'm concerned. See, in these United States, what's our main objective? Never trust the government, regardless who's in there. That's why I still question these things in good faith about what has happened. Always observe responsibly and all that good stuff. So, looks like Christopher Roan was in the studio and 4Q. Well, thank you for coming. I know I ranted a lot on this, but it's very essential. People really need to know these things. And don't be surprised if this was part of a global order plan. Remember, Maduro can be very sloppy. His entitled attributes, saying, hey, you're getting too weak. I'm just claiming. I'm not saying it's true. And we all know, too, Trump could be a prop as well. So, Kio Bono. Who benefits? That's the question. So, you folks that are celebrating the freedom of Venezuela, what are you going to do about it? Because I remember the people, same thing in the Little Havana, they all said about Fidel Castro dying. What have they done? I don't want grandstanders. I want people to engage. Doesn't matter where you're at. That's how I look at things. So the people in Venezuela, that they're right now, you got some cleaning up to do. And it's okay to give the government the big middle finger. And my honest viewpoint, I remember reading on the Mises Institute article on this a while back. If the 6 states in that republic that had the oil resources and get ready to secede, this wouldn't have happened at all. The Chavez regime would have been collapsed. Just like Richard Spencer with the alt-right. Be vigilant, exercise liberty, support natural law in Venezuela and beyond. Well, that will be it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, recommendations, all that good stuff, whatever you do, please use decorum. You can hit me via email to ll3.podcast@proton.me. If you want to donate, go to paypal.me or cash.app/look3. If you want to support the UNS Review, Epoch Times, Ron Paul Institute, Anti-War, please do so. Tell them LL3 sent you. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Till next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. And may your guardian spirits be with you.